Beth is a certified peer specialist at the Living Room, a peer-run support program of Behavioral Health Network in Springfield, where she's also a forensic peer specialist for the Crisis Intervention Training Program. She's a native of Pittsfield and has been living in the Pioneer Valley for the past 10 years. In 2012, she began volunteering at NAMI Western Massachusetts, where she now serves as the vice president of the board of directors. As a presenter for NAMI's In Our Own Voice program, she has spoken about her recovery to audiences throughout the state. In 2016, Beth was the recipient of the NAMI Massachusetts Carl Ackerman Peer Award. She's also vice president of the Department of Mental Health Citizens Area Board for Western Massachusetts. As a former music teacher, she earned a bachelor's degree of music from SUNY Potsdam and a Master of Science in Education from the College of St. Rose. Beth seeks to inspire a spirit of openness and respect for all paths to recovery and to join others in the fight to end stigma faced by individuals living with mental health and addiction challenges. Come on up, Beth.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As a certified peer specialist, part of my job is to share my lived experience and my recovery story with the people that I support. And today I'm going to share just a snippet of my recovery story and my lived experience with you to illustrate how peer support has played such an important role in my own recovery. When I was 12 years old, I went on my first diet. And that established a pattern of anorexia nervosa, which continued into adulthood. And anorexia is not about vanity. It's not vanity gone awry. Instead, it is a physical manifestation of deep inner pain. And very often, it is a response to trauma. In my case, sexual trauma. And it is a way to seek control over a body that has been deeply violated, and a way to seek safety. Anorexia nervosa has the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. And the cause of death in anorexia is not from the grave physical dangers that are real and present, such as organ failure and cardiac arrest, but instead is from suicide. So now I'd like to share a bit of my story so you can hear how I moved from being near death many times to being a solid 4 years into a full recovery. A little over 10 years ago, I got on an Amtrak train from Syracuse, New York, where I was living at the time, and headed to the Midwest to attend a treatment center for eating disorders. It was a residential program. I had eaten barely nothing for many, many months prior to going to this treatment center. And when I first got there, I was still taking liquid supplements because my body was not able to accept solid food yet. And I finally got to a point where I was able to eat actual food. And it was so very difficult for me, I can't even express to you. And one day I was sitting in the dining room, and we were given food. We were assigned what food we were supposed to eat. And sitting in front of me was a plate on which was a frozen waffle, swimming in sticky, sugary syrup and butter. And to me, now that would be delicious. But then it was an absolute nightmare on a plate. And it was much more than just a waffle. Just as eating disorders are much more than about a number on a scale or getting into a certain size dress. And so often, sitting in that dining room, as I was struggling to eat, and oftentimes refusing to eat, out of being paralyzed by fear. Not out of stubbornness, but because I was afraid. I was admonished for being non-compliant, threatened with having to take liquid supplements again, and best of all, told that meal times were not a place for tears. I remember very clearly the day that I walked into that dining room and I was faced with that waffle. And I burst into tears, and I tried so hard to calm down, and I tried very hard to get myself to eat, but I just couldn't. And thankfully, into the dining room walked a peer advocate, a peer specialist, who is employed by that particular residential program. And she is someone who had been very solidly into her recovery from bulimia and chose to support people who were going through similar experiences. So she came in, she saw me, and she sat down. And she said something to me that really turned my time at that program around. She looked at me and she looked at my plate and she said, "Wow, waffles, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, and I am terrified." And she says, "I know you're terrified, and I was terrified once too. But since then, I figured out some ways that have helped me to work around those fears so that I can eat. And if you want to, I can talk to you about that later." And I thought, sure. And I was so amazed that I was being given choices. And I was being heard by a person who had been there and done that. And here she was, modeling recovery for me. And she offered to sit with me and eat her meal with me. And that was so helpful, and I was able to finish that waffle. And later on, we talked. And instead of saying that I was non-compliant or threatening me with cans of Ensure, she just listened. She listened and she heard me tell her how very difficult and terrifying it was for me to eat. Not because I wanted to be a size 0, but because eating and leaving my eating disorder behind would mean finding a new identity, and that was like jumping off a cliff into nowhere. I had no idea what that meant for me. And for losing the safety that I had sought in the anorexia. And then she shared with me how much her life had changed and how different her life was once she began to eat and began to heal and began to recover. And we explored together, through that connection of lived experience, the possibilities for me and how my life too might change if I chose the path to recovery. She was able, as we must do as peer specialists and peer advocates, to reach into her own pain and form a connection with me. And she was able to foster hope in my recovery and help me to move forward. And that is the essence and the beauty and the power of peer support, and why I'm so proud to be part of this profession. And I see this every day that I work at the living room at BHN. Every time that doorbell rings and a guest walks in, they are living their very own recovery story. And they're all at different points in that story. Some are just beginning, and they're scared just as I was facing that meal. Some come as a daily part of their recovery, as a way to find a safe and supportive environment. And some come just to say thank you. To say thank you for helping them move forward. So I ask you to please recognize and support and fund these programs, which help individuals to move forward in their recovery in ways that are meaningful to them. Thank you.